So, the Addams Family. No, not the comic. No, not the television show. No, not the cartoon television show. No, not the live action movies. No, we're talking about the feature length animated film by Universal. Uh, Now here's the thing, like Addams Family would seem like it would be appropriate for animation. You can do a lot more with animation. You can experiment more. You can have more monsters and stuff like that. You can have, interesting, deaths and stuff like that. You don't feel as trapped as you do in live action. You can do more crazy stuff within animation. And it would feel like, it would feel like you could do more, if this film, took off its kid gloves and was allowed to do some of that, darker, crazier stuff that like the live action films did. Because, for most people, their perceptions of the Addams Family are usually either from, the iconic television series or from the live action films with Raul Julia. I mean, for a lot of people, Raul Julia is going to be everyone's Gomez Addams. And it's kind of unfortunate here because it feels like this Addams Family movie, it's like it looks like it's trying to replicate more of the style of the comics, which is fine. It's fine if they want to try that. I think it's actually more interesting if they try that. But the thing is, the story that they're telling here is kind of more reminiscent of the live action films and doesn't really add anything more to it. I mean, it sticks with kind of the style that we expect from the Addams Family, where it's this creepy family who clashes, with the quote unquote normal world, and how they and how their weirdness reflects on the rest of society. But no more than it really did in the films. And actually, maybe even a little bit less here, even though there is kind of a little bit more of a meaningful message to this. So it's interesting because this film actually kind of starts off with like the origins of the Addams Family. So we see where Gomez Addams, voiced by Oscar Isaac, and Morticia Addams, voiced by Charlize Theron, both come together for marriage, and they're driven from their village where they used to live, which we don't really get a lot of insight into. We don't really address like how they live there or address like a whole bunch of what's going on with them in terms of society. Just kind of like the bare bones. They're monsters. People don't like monsters, so they grab the torch and they force them to move. And so they end up moving to New Jersey, and of course they make a New Jersey joke. They meet Lurch along the way. They have Thing already with them. They find a creepy old house, and they settle down. And unfortunately, in the 20 not even 20, it's like 13 years I think they've been there. They have the two kids. They have Pugsley, and they have Wednesday. But then they also don't realize that the town below them has been building up suburbs, and they're essentially just kind of the kind of like plasticky, yuppie type suburbs, very generic looking people. In fact, it's so, the film has to be so blunt with a lot of its messaging at times that the suburb below them is literally called Assimilation. Get it? There's even a little bit of subtle hints in there about, the commentary on suburban living, and there's some subtleness to it, but then there's also a lot of bluntness to it. Because the whole town is essentially kind of secretly run by this woman called Margot Needler, who's voiced by Allison Janney. And she's a reality show host who hosts kind of like a house flippers type deal where she tries to give people their dream house. She's got extremely large hair, and she is super perky, except when she's not on camera, she's kind of a bit of a jerk. And then they reveal that that she's actually kind of manipulating the neighborhood in her own way and kind of like controlling them through both surveillance and social media. So that's kind of interesting, but again, this is kind of stuff we've all seen before. We've seen the Addams Family film where they have to contend with an outsider villain who's posed as normal, except they're really not that normal, and they're actually more evil than the Addams. We've seen that before. But like I said, this film kind of has more like the kid gloves on here. So if you're expecting some over-the-top death of this character, that doesn't come by the end. By the end of the film, it's mostly just, like a message about, like coming together. Which I'll admit, I think is fine, only because, like, I think I appreciate the third act of the Addams Family movies more than anything. Because the film, like I said, it replicates the style of the live-action films, where they start off, just having gag after gag after gag, and they kind of exhaust it in the first act, and then you get to the second act, you're kind of like, okay, we've gotten all the gags out of the way, but can we get to a little bit of a story here? And we get to a little bit of one, but because there's multiple stories going on, like Wednesday wanting to break out of the norm of her family's style, and Pugsley having to go through with what's essentially like the bar mitzvah equivalent of the Addams family, and then you have Gomez wrestling with how he should raise Pugsley, and Morticia wrestling with how she should raise her daughter. And it feels like it's just enough to juggle, but not quite enough to dig deep into it. And I feel like a big problem with that is that this film adheres to the template that we see with all modern animated films. In other words, there's expected musical numbers, there's expected slapstick gags, a lot of pop music inserted here. I will say this though, the film kind of feels like it's making concessions, like it's bringing over some stuff from the comics, some stuff from the television series, some stuff from the live action films. And I say that only because there's literally a sequence in the end of the film where they just reenact shot for shot the opening sequence of the Addams Family, with the classic soundtrack and with the new animated cast. And I gotta admit, they maintain the format here, but they never make anything all that outlandish for the dark jokes here. I mean, there are moments where I smiled. I appreciated, how the film just kind of casually goes about its nature, about Pugsley really liking explosives and Gomez's obsession with swords and all that. There's some fun stuff in there, but like I said, it's broken up by stuff we didn't need there. Like there are scenes that are broken up by Lurch playing on the harpsichord, and he essentially doesn't have an arc. I mean, we see that he can read for one scene, but for most of the film, we're just watching him just try to play different types of familiar songs on the harpsichord, which is cute, but it's just kind of like a running gag that kind of just runs out of steam. I mean, there are a few funny lines here and there. I do like the resolve of this film. I do think it has a nice message. I just feel like it didn't give me enough, especially since by the third act we introduce a lot of different Addams Family characters as well too. Like there's a big family reunion and everything, and I feel like that it needs like an extra kick of that cynical humor in there. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's there, it's present, but it feels like it's been boiled down just enough for a kid audience to enjoy it. Now on that level, I guess I can kind of appreciate the film, and that if kids really like the Addams Family, maybe they'll go back and watch the live action film, maybe they'll go back and watch the television series. But I guarantee if they do, they'll find much more wit in those films than much more wit in those films and that TV series than they're really getting in this animated film here. Don't get me wrong, I like the performances here. I think Oscar Isaac does a good job as Gomez. I just really wasn't feeling it as much with him. I guess the one character who comes close to being kind of like interesting for his role is Nick Kroll playing Uncle Fester. And it's mostly because Grohl's good at doing those kind of like exaggerated voices. And I kind of enjoyed his kind of take on Fester. It gave him his own character, right? I didn't really feel like I was looking at someone trying to be, what has come before, like the rest of the other actors. But like I said, like the film, it's lacking a little bit of that extra Addams magic, especially since we don't get a whole lot of that, that romance between Gomez and Morticia, which always seemed to kind of be like the heart and soul of the picture. They represented, undying love, and we don't really get a whole bunch of the, like Tish, that's French type stuff. We get a little bit of it, but not quite enough. So like, it's weird. It's got some of the stuff I like about the Addams Family in it, but then it's also lacking in the bite, and it just kind of turns into a generic animated film by the end of it. I did smile here and there. I got a little bit of a few smirks at this stuff, but it's mostly kind of bound by what we've come to expect from modern animated films, and I really think that holds this film back, because I do think it has potential. If there were another Addams Family movie, I'd like to see it. I'm hoping that they can, have a little bit more bite to them. Because it just doesn't have that same appeal that the other Addams Family properties had. At the very least, I will say this: it is better than the Addams Family animated series from the 70s, where they took their house on the road. So that's, I guess that's one endorsement I can give the film. Um, yeah, it just feels like a little bit of like missed opportunities here, especially considering the voice cast here. You've got Catherine O'Hara in this film. You've got oh god, who else you got? You got Bette Midler. You have, oh my god, I mean, you have Bette Midler playing like the grandma, and I guess like I can kind of give Universal credit for this. You know, they do the same thing that they do with Illumination, where they pick out voices for the voice cast and then use them in ways you wouldn't expect and that you don't instantly recognize. So I kind of appreciate that, but at the same time, they're roles that really don't stick out that much. Especially since like sometimes I will say this. So the one voice that did become very noticeable was Snoop Dogg voicing It. Now you would think, okay, he's voicing It. You know, it's a character who speaks in like garbled backwards talk. You know, it's a hairy character who speaks in very garbled dialogue. But they introduce him with a Snoop Dogg song, and if you listen closely, you can pretty much hear just like Snoop Dogg's voice played backwards and at a higher pitch. You can hear it through there. So like, I mean, the film has potential, but it's just not there, and it's held back by a lot of what we expect. The animation on anyone who's not in the Addams Family just looks like, and I know that this is kind of the point, but they look so bland and generic and just kind of like weird to look at. They just feel like just like boring designs, you know. So like it's got some of that Addams Family charm, but I think it's really held back by the current template of animated films right now, which is really a shame because I think it really could have stood out from the competition, and instead it just kind of like blends into the familiar formula that we've seen with other animated remakes, kind of like the Grinch and stuff like that. You know, it fits neatly into that template and doesn't really break out of its shell, which is strange for a film which is all about, you know, being different. And this film really isn't that different as it should be. So, for the Addams Family, 2 out of 5 stars.